Okay, so next up, we have one of Y Combinator's favorite guest speakers. He's come to speak at some of our dinners, and his stories are just amazing. I'm not sure he can tell all of them here, but the ones he does tell will be fabulous. So we have Max Levchin. He's the founder of PayPal and Slide.
Hello. Hello. I am Max Levchin. So I never prepare for these things as a rule. And then the night before I start fretting and asking my friends and what should I talk about? And send Paul messages like, what should I talk about? And Paul never responds. So he also didn't respond this time around, and I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. So on the drive down, I kind of start taking notes while I drive. And I'm still here, or I am here now, which means that I didn't crash, but inevitably these things cause real life-threatening moments. So normally I just sort of get in these events and I kind of go, well, I have this piles and piles of material from my life as an entrepreneur that's generally pretty funny, and I just sort of tell stories and people laugh sometimes, and I judge how long I can go by either the limit set by the organizer or how hard people laugh. More often than not, it's the latter that gets me to get off the stage. So this time around, I'll actually try to do something useful. So since I did risk my life by trying to type something with my thumb while driving. So, but if I promised Paul two things. One, if I run out of material, I'll just cut it over to you and you can ask me questions. And two, if I really feel like the place is falling asleep, I'll just cut over to funny stories. But I really, really ask you not to blog or like repeat them and stuff, because some of them are pretty embarrassing and not for me. So one of the things that one of my friends and a YC alumnus advised me last night is to talk about founders and co-founders, because that's the stuff that startups are made of, and it's so hard, and people are having such a hard time finding co-founders. It's such a problem. And so I thought, all right, well, what do I know about co-founders? I've started 4 companies, all of them failed. 5th one was PayPal, 6th one was Slide. I'm about to start another one. So I'm just, one of these crazy guys that can't get enough of this stuff, and I should by now know exactly how to do co-founder picking. So as I got here, I realized that I have a funny story about, one of the moments when I thought, holy shit, I picked the wrong co-founder. So I was in a parking lot. I actually forget the name of the complex, but there's kind of a nice-ish complex right on the other side of Sand Hill Road. In a minute, I'll remember the name, of course, but that's where Peter Thiel, my PayPal co-founder, used to live, right as we started the company. And I lived just sort of walking distance from there, so pretty frequently when we'd be brainstorming about PayPal, he would either drive me to my apartment and then drive himself home, or drive himself home and I'd walk to my apartment because I didn't have a car. But we would sort of frequent, or I would drive him to his apartment and then drive myself. So whatever it was, one night, something like midnight, it was in my car, drive to his apartment, park right outside the complex, and start talking about how we're going to take over the world. And it's about 11:30, and we're just going to go at it, and it gets really exciting, and it's like, by 2 o'clock in the morning, I realize that the parking lot is completely pitch black. And I go, well, Peter, get out. It's way past my bedtime. I gotta go. And he goes, all right. So he gets out. I turn the key, and I realize that I left my lights on. The car battery's dead. And there's this moment of like, well, so what do you do? And Peter kind of looks at me. I look at him. He says, well, good night. And walks off. At this point, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I moved to Palo Alto half a year ago. I certainly can't afford AAA, so I wouldn't know where to start getting a replacement battery. I kind of like, crap, I should not have started a company with this guy. Obviously, he will abandon me in the middle of a dark parking lot at 2 o'clock in the morning. So true story. This was probably the only time I actually doubted Peter as a co-founder, but I did have a moment where in fact, I don't actually remember how I got out of that particular pickle, to be completely honest. I may have just left the car there and walked home or something like that, because none of this is rememberable afterwards. So with that, I started making a list of my top mistakes as an entrepreneur. So I was going to make a top 10 list, but the drive from San Francisco, where I now live, is too short. So it's a top something list because I didn't really number them, and I don't remember when it ends. But it gets progressively darker, more embarrassing. So, this has kind of been bantered about, and I will give you the point and then offer a rebuttal. So I've been quoted, or something along those lines, saying that one should always look for a co-founder, and I think PG is a proponent of that notion as well, and lots of people will tell you, yeah, it's lonely at the top, it's really bad news to be alone. It's actually not entirely true. So I'd had a chance to reflect on that because PayPal was pretty successful, and I had a co-founder, and Slide was, by some measure, successful financially, by other measure, didn't come close to PayPal. We'll talk about that in a moment. So I generally felt it was kind of mixed results, and I didn't have a co-founder. So I thought, well, clearly correlation, sample size of 1 for each category. There you go. It doesn't quite work that way. One of the more memorable moments where I actually completely scratched out the thing about Peter being an asshole for dropping me in the parking lot like he did was this one time. We had about 9 weeks of cash. It was May 2000. Peter, at this point, I actually know it's just his shtick, by the way. This is like total, at the time, was all new to me. I was like, holy crap, this guy can see the future, because he was very convincingly arguing for basically the end of the world in the capital markets. He was like, any minute now, it's going to crash. And of course, as you all, or some of you will remember well, 2000 was a bad time in capital markets. Couldn't raise money. So I was like, wow, this guy has a crystal ball. He's amazing. I gotta stick with him no matter what he does in parking lots. And of course, now that I've known the guy for over 10 years, he actually just always predicts doom and gloom. Like, any time you see him on record, it's like, well, Peter Thiel says the end of the world is coming. The real estate is gonna collapse. It will be in the darkest depression possible. People with pitchforks will eat each other. And at some point, he'll be right, and then he'll really look amazing. But between now and then, he can just continuously predict badness. But in 2000, the writing was actually on the wall, and we were really just feeling the heat, and it was bad news. We had 9 weeks of cash. Yahoo just tried to buy us. We went into Yahoo. I met Zod, who I didn't really know at the time was a super nice, very mellow guy, because the first opening question he had to me said, "How many hackers?" I said, "What do you mean? How many hackers do you have?" And I said, "Well, we have like 7 engineers," and he's like, "Just hackers." And so I'm like, oh, that's it. So anyway, Yahoo didn't buy us. We were running out of money, and we were just starting to feel the burn of fraud. And so we were working insane hours. I walked into Peter's office one of the nights, and he was like, "Hey man, how's the deadline for this and that and everything?" And I said, we'll launch fine, but what does it matter, man? I feel like we're going to run out of cash, and you're right, the markets have tanked and we're toast. And he's not a warm, fuzzy guy at all, and he sort of looked at me from his desk, and he was completely exhausted, just flew in from Japan, where he was trying to raise money from Yakuza. I kid you not. And incidentally, Yakuza wired us some money before we figured out they were Yakuza, and then we said, oh, we can't take your money. And I said, no, we already wired it to you. Like, how did you wire it to us? We didn't really give you wiring instructions. Like, we're Yakuza, what the fuck? And true story. Look it up. Hikari Tsushin is the name of the shell company they used. I wish I could make this stuff up. So Peter looked up from his desk, sort of fresh from Japan, basically said, look, don't worry about it. We will raise money. It'll be fine. I give you 100% confidence that we'll be able to close this round. We won't run out of cash. Just launch the damn thing already. And this was probably the single warmest experience I've had with him as a co-founder. Because I actually went home, yeah, exactly. It's like, he could have given me a hug or something, but no, all he could say is like, don't worry about it, launch the thing already. But the job of a great co-founder is not to commiserate with you. The thing that makes you feel great about having a co-founder isn't some guy you can be like, oh man, we're fucked. Yeah, we are fucked. Like, no, it's no help. So, the job of a great co-founder is actually, in the moment when you're lowest, to tell you you'll be all right. And not like, oh, you'll be okay. It's like your mom telling you you'll be okay when you're failing out of college. You're still going to fail out of college. You should actually drop out and start a company, but you already know that. So the job of a great co-founder is to provide that platform of support when you most need it. And at that time, I actually walked out of his office thinking, you know what, I don't know if he's right or wrong, but that just gave me all the reasons in the world to go stay up one more night and finish that thing and launch it, whatever it was, and it worked out great. He did in fact close around, and we didn't really even have to take a valuation hit at all. But the thing about having a co-founder, the thing about having, sometimes people tell you, equal parts co-founder or somebody with the same amount of equity or whatever, really what it boils down to is that moment of getting emotional and practical support. And if that person is not your co-founder, or if that person is a board member, or a confidant, or a YC compatriot, or whatever that is, that's what's important. You can actually start a company entirely on your own, and I think you'll be all right. But not having anyone like that next to you can be really, really, really detrimental. Because at the very top, when you're responsible for it all, no one can hear you scream. When you go home and you go, we are fucked, and there's no one to tell you that you're not, and know exactly what the parameters are, that's really painful. And even if you have a great girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, whatever, and they'll tell you, you'll be okay, it's exactly the same thing as your mom telling you, oh, it'll be fine if you fail out of college, you can take it next year. No, your company will fail, and that's kind of the end of the world for that particular moment in your life. So it's an important thing to know. The corollary to this story, and as I said, I'll get progressively less funny and darker. Picking a co-founder, but I do have some additional zingers, I think. Picking a co-founder that you have a hard time dealing with, or don't quite have the same value system, or that you don't want to impress on occasion. Those are the sort of things that I jotted down when I was trying to figure out, like, what did I think about when I was trying to decide who will be my co-founder, company X, Y, or Z. The way I described the sort of original meeting and conversation, incidentally, I met Peter maybe like 100 yards away from here. So this is a kind of a particularly auspicious spot. So he was this nerdy guy who was giving a lecture about something I had no idea about, financial systems and currency trading. And he was obviously not a computer science guy, but he was obviously a nerd. And what formed is this kind of weird friendship, courtship between two nerds that were trying to basically measure dicks while trying to impress each other. And we spent the next couple of months hanging out a lot and throwing math puzzles at each other in cafes. And basically going like, well, I can do this. And you'd be like, well, I'm a chess master. Like, well, I played chess in high school. I was the 20th highest ranked chess player in America when I was a teenager. And it was one of these things where we were kind of sizing each other up and figuring out, you know, what exactly can this guy do? But by the end of that sort of weird process, we basically knew that the other person was someone we ultimately really respected. And so whatever crazy flaws he had, and I'll keep coming back to the parking lot story because obviously I don't have enough material, it was always something that we could rely on where we would basically be like, hey, no, that guy is really cool. I remember when we met, that was really important. Give you a counterpoint, I once started a company with a guy I thought was incredibly impressive. He finished business school, he had run a company, he had all kinds of accolades. He was like 5 years my senior, which when I was 19 years old, I was really impressed with. And we started a company together, and we were selling something to the enterprise. God knows what. It was a really bad idea. I actually don't remember exactly what it was. I saw him on the phone once trying to sell something, and I thought, holy crap, he doesn't know what the hell he's selling. Like, he is explaining something, and he's either lying or he doesn't know what he's talking about. And at this point, probably incorrectly, now that I'm a little bit older, I tried to correct his pitch while he was on the phone. So I started writing down, like, hey, here's how you pitch this thing. And to his credit, he actually kind of didn't really say anything. He finished talking, he hung up, and he just exploded at me. He's like, what the fuck do you think, who do you think you are? And as that happened, I realized two things. He was completely right. There's absolutely no business that I had teaching him how to do his job, because he was a sales guy and he was a successful sales guy. And there was absolutely no way I could ever run a company with a guy who would explode like that at me. And so, you know, we broke up, and the company obviously failed as a result. But the only salient point to the story is when you ever have that moment with your co-founder, you go, ooh, this isn't going to work. Like kind of the weird pang of the, we might have to break up when you think about a relationship. Get divorced now. That it will never work out. And I have experienced that enough times in my entrepreneurial life now to know that this is actually good advice. A lot of times you'll feel really wrong and really bad because the person you're talking or you're working with and you're trying to get by with the weird encounter you just had is someone you really believe can add a ton of value to the enterprise, somebody your venture capitalists have just put a big bet on and you're the young and experienced co-founder that it doesn't matter. Whoa, sorry. If that's the thing that makes you go, whoa, this isn't the right person to be with, it's not. My favorite movie quote of all times is whenever there's any doubt, there's no doubt. It applies just about to everything in life, but it particularly applies to people. When you can't really believe anymore that this person is the right co-founder, run away. Like, even if it means returning money to your investors, it will never work. Speaking of that, one of my favorite mistakes, which I really paid for probably again and again and again in my professional career, is that not in a co-founder, fortunately, situation, but in employee situation, frequently you'll find yourself facing an employee or sometimes a group of employees, God forbid, but typically an employee at a reasonably high level in the company, typically a really talented engineer that is very well liked, that is someone who is just obviously very talented. People love them, they want to work with them, for them, they want to connect, it's great. And you know that person is a net negative. They're either just a nasty person, or they're creating a faction within the company, or they're causing rifts, or God knows what else that they're creating. That is the time to let them go. And the public service that I have to offer here is no matter how hard you think it's going to be to get rid of that person, no matter how difficult you think the conversation is going to be, do that now. It's the sort of adage about if you're going to get divorced, do it now. If you know you're going to get divorced, do it now. It's really hard. It's one of these things where it feels very gut-wrenching. Firing people in general is a huge pain, and recently read an article on Quora, which was anonymous, whoever you are, calling me a modern-day fascist. I think the fascist was misspelled, so I feel good about that. But because the person claimed that I fired people, something along those lines. I certainly have fired people. And firing people is always probably singularly most painful process for me during running or managing of a company, in particular if you actually like the person. If you don't like the person, if they've done something really nasty, firing them is like, hey, guess what? You're an asshole, get out. But it's like, hey, you are a great human being, I like you, it's just not meant to be. It's a lot like breaking up with someone, except it's the person you probably spend a lot more time with than your significant other because you're sharing an office, smelling each other's pheromones all day long as opposed to just occasionally. So the situation there is really, 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 really difficult, but you got to do it. However, I come with a message of hope and peace. I will teach you how to fire someone right now that will make both of you feel pretty good, or at least as good as you can under the circumstances. You sit that person down and you say, I'd like to ask you to resign. Works unfailingly. I have no idea why it works, but when people hear that, they kind of go, shit, you're right. It's not working. Write that down somewhere. It really does work. Every most difficult firing I've ever done, I started with that line. It worked out a lot better than I thought. Except for once when the guy actually started banging his head against the table, which was really, really weird. It could also have to do with the fact that I had to break into his machine to prove that he didn't write the code he claimed he did, which is also a true story. I won't tell you any more of that one. On to some other classic mistakes of mine. So incidentally, all of these lessons, if it sounds kind of funny or non sequitur or whatever, at least it's true. All these things I have committed several times before I learned the lesson. So I'm, smart man or woman learns on the mistakes of others. I've obviously not learned nearly as much as I could have on my own mistakes, but I can at least record them. So a classic engineering mistake that I have committed, and Peter, in fact, summarized it or distilled it for me, is confusing hard and valuable. So when I was, I'd like to say your age, but I actually can't see half of you, and I'd like to believe that I am at least occasionally mapping well to the age of the audience. When I was really, really young, as in I just graduated college, I thought that basically a good use of my time would be to just bang my head against the wall to see if the wall would give. That's how Peter described it. What it meant is that I'd run into a problem and I think, oh, that's really hard. And, well, I think I'm smart enough to crack this particular puzzle. It'd be great. Somewhere in there, I also convinced myself that as soon as I do that, money will pour down from heaven or accolades or some sort of great things will happen because I solved a really, really hard problem. Reality is the causality typically works one way, but not the other. So really, really valuable things are frequently pretty hard. If you want to build the next master password file for the internet, like Facebook, it's pretty much hard. However, walking through walls, to give an example, is really, really difficult, but it's of absolutely no value to anyone unless you can really do it. The trying process will just break your various parts of your body, and intellectually it works the same way. Give you a true and honest account of the early days of PayPal. The company was founded under the bright name of FieldLink, which was meant to connect field workers, link them, as a matter of fact, to their enterprise systems. This sounds unfamiliar, it's because nobody really wants the damn thing. But we wanted to build a system that would take your PDA and give you a true, fully secure VPN into the enterprise. That's what PayPal was founded to be, because I wanted to solve really hard problems in security. But security actually is a pretty difficult thing in its own right, but I didn't think it was hard enough, so I wanted to put a VPN powered by RSA encryption, which is a relatively difficult mathematical structure, onto a Palm Pilot, which at the time was powered by the Dragon Ball chip, which is for those of you who don't know, Motorola 68000. Its maximum speed is 16 megahertz. For those of you who don't know what M stands for, because you were born in the gigahertz days, it's really, really, really slow. So signing, for example, or generating a key, forget signing, generating a key, a one-time operation in an RSA crypto system on a Dragon Ball chip took about 43 minutes on average. So you're whipping out your Palm Pilot, you want to read into your little corporate email from the field, you wait for 43 minutes and you get treated. No problem. So I built it, and I was like, hey, Peter, we're going to start a company around this. And Peter was nuts enough to say, yeah, sounds pretty good. Can you improve that? Like, 43 minutes is a little long. Like, yeah, I can totally do it. So we spend like a couple of months, and Peter put in a bunch of money, and we're kind of cranking at it. And I was like, yeah, I think I can do like 20 minutes. I figured out some really clever things. He's like, are you mad? And by then he'd like driven up and down Silicon Valley, pitching this to various enterprises, and like went to Palm, and they were like, yeah, if you guys can do it, it'll be great. But Dragon Ball is going to be replaced by the next chip, Dragon Ball Z, and that thing's going to be powerful, 24 megahertz. I'm like, All right, so 17 minutes. All right, so it was definitely looking really grim. So I went to Stanford and found a guy who's now a good friend of mine, who was at the time an assistant professor, now is a full professor, named Dan Bonet, who's probably one of the brightest cryptographers working in the field today. I told him all about this stuff, and he said, have you thought about elliptical curve? I said, oh, shit, you're right. I completely forgot about all that stuff. And so elliptical curve crypto system is a different kind of cryptography. Look it up if you're interested, but it's much, much, much faster because the math is a lot simpler. Discrete log problem beats factoring products of large primes anytime. So there I went and implemented my own elliptical curve, and then I found a library that somebody did, and it was like, man, we could do it in like 2 minutes, which actually would have been okay, except I went from a hard problem to another hard problem, but no one really wanted to read their corporate email in a Palm Pilot. Just wasn't a market for it. It didn't really matter. It was well ahead of its time, and moreover, there were less than 1 million Palm Pilots sold at the time. And they were mostly in the hands of consumers, and they were not allowed at the enterprise. And no security officer was going to allow them for the next 10 years. So this whole thing was just this grim upon grim upon grim. So long story short, if you have a really, really hard problem you want to solve, ask yourself the question again and again, is it of any value to anyone? And if the answer is no, don't bother. I will break this up now with a short, I can tell by the nodding of the heads that this particular one didn't resonate, but it's probably the single best one I have to offer as far as usefulness goes, so maybe it'll stick. But I do have a moment of comic relief for you. One other thing that I learned at PayPal and at Slide, but in Slide in particular, don't let your office be a dump. True story. If you think that having mismatched IKEA desks is really cool right now, but as soon as you get funding, you'll fix it. If you're working really, really hard, you won't have time. As soon as you get funding, you'll be busy getting more people to join your company. And whatever state of the office you're in right now, like if it's a dump, it's just going to be worse of a dump. And when you move offices, you're going to take all the crap that you've amassed in the dump number 1 with you, and you'll make a bigger, more elaborate dump number 2. So case in point. You don't have to go with like Neiman Marcus, but careful with the whole dump the office thing, because it really sticks. I remember looking back when we were moving out, having been acquired by Google, from the office that we had, the last office that Slide had, which was office number 4, I think. We're like, wow, it's a really large dump we have here. So I was kind of bummed out about that. I think we could have done a nicer job. So next one, I'll do a better job, I think. But anyone still watches or watched South Park here? Good. I've never actually seen this, so I am retelling you a story I have, in fact, no real knowledge of telling. But one of my more honest investors, and I will keep their name out of this conversation, one time took me aside after a board meeting that he was present for, and he said, "Have you seen South Park, the Underpants Gnomes episode?" And I said, "No, I don't really watch TV. Don't have time for that. I work so hard." And he said, "I don't give a shit. Watch the Underpants Gnomes episode." And of course I didn't. But I asked for a summary, and he said, look, basically, your business model is the Underpants Gnomes model. Collect underpants, profit. So the fancy way of putting this is typically people, when they start companies, follow a vision. They kind of wake up one morning and say, holy crap, I have a problem I really want to see fixed, or I know somebody else has a problem they want to see fixed, and that's a great kind of that's the aim. That's where you want to go. There's a part that is very easy to get really attached to, namely, I'm going to go and write some code because that's what I know how to do. I'm really fast. I'm really good at it. Go, go, go. There's that middle part, the question mark in the underpants model, where after you've collected all the underpants or written all the code or whatever it is you're going to do, you have to tie that together enough times where it winds up being profitable or winds up being a business. It doesn't have to be profitable. You might get acquired for $20 million, $500,000 per engineer. So you know who I'm talking about. The middle part is called lack of clarity. It's the inability to have the discipline to condense your vision into a strategy. It is probably the single most annoying thing about every potential angel investment that I evaluate, that I typically pass on, or always pass on as a matter of fact, when the founder cannot say, hey, the distillation of my vision into a specific strategy is this. My head turns off and I go, Underpants Gnomes. And I've never seen the episode, but I'm confident those of you who have know exactly what I'm talking about, and those who haven't by now should go and watch it. It's clearly a brilliant distillation of American capitalism. So how did I wind up with the underpants? This is the sad part. So I should know better, right? One, I'm on stage giving you advice. What the hell am I doing if I don't have the distillation down? The thing that plagues second time, and this is potentially irrelevant advice to a lot of people, but it's at least interesting, hopefully. The thing that plagues people pretty often is fear of failure and fear of judgment. And I certainly, for one, thought it would never be a problem for me. But after PayPal, for a few years, I actually lived in a strange world where I thought it would be more important to live up to the shadow that my team and I cast with PayPal than to have that middle part really, really figured out. And it's actually pretty easy to do, especially if you have success in your past. You can raise money at a huge valuation. You can say things that people are too polite to call you out on, to tell you that this is just an underpants strategy. And you can kind of weave your story through without that middle part ever really being fleshed out for a very long time. Eventually, you have to deal with it, and I certainly had to and dealt with it. But it doesn't really matter exactly how it applies to me personally. The lesson to be learned there is starting a company or running a company requires you to become oddly unemotional. And that means dumping fear of failure, dumping fear of judgment, dumping the desire to impress anyone. Nothing really matters in running companies other than passion for the product. That's the only emotion that you should allow yourself to have. Everything else is just extraneous. It's garbage. It doesn't really help you at all. if you focus on that, you'll realize that the holes that exist in your vision or in your story are really big and bright, and you have to fill them with content or with substance or with meaning. But if you spend a lot of your time kind of going, wait a second, how will this make me look? You will inevitably wind up in a lot of dead ends. So this is a probably single most important lesson I can offer you, especially if you're contemplating your second startup, whether your first one failed or succeeded. Be mindful of emotion that doesn't serve the purpose of building an amazing product with a passion that you have for it. So all of this is, I realize that it's probably a little bit too bouncy around, and it's a list that I constructed while I was trying to figure out what can I say that doesn't embarrass anyone too badly. Except for myself, of course. The final point that I have to offer, actually, that I wish came from me, but really came from my wife. When I was going over this stuff with her, and I thought through these sort of mistakes ad nauseum during Slide, during PayPal. We've been together for a long enough time now where she'd seen me miserable over my own errors and errors of my peers and errors of my co-founders enough times. So you know the most important thing you can actually advise yourself or anyone else? Ignore your mistakes. Like, what is your problem? You're good at some things, just go do that. The number one thing you should worry about is, am I doing the things that I'm good at?